Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Recall a few days ago, Biden compared Trump to Joseph Goebbels, which he pronounced Goebbels or Gobbles. It was like a turkey Nazi or something. The level of rhetoric, has been pretty low.
Trump, as James indicated, has been basically the only person to marshal that energy in a way that does not entail burning American cities to the ground. And the left is basically trying to secretly marshal the burn cities to the ground energy while they sail into the White House on a veneer of civility and respectability. You wish to know what clown world is? I will show you clown world in a handful of dust.
So, racist, what does that mean? Well, it means what water-wheel-headed intellectual minstrel Ibram X stage name Kendi says it is. That is the operative definition of racism on the left today. And there are some dissenters, thank God, of course, some people with, functioning brainstems still.
It's very easy to see if you can have someone running for president say Antifa doesn't exist, how Antifa and those organizations are going to continue to commit acts of political violence. Are they ultimately going to start persecuting, say, Christians directly? Of course they are. Churches are already being burned down, and you can't talk about it. You can't say anything about it.
So these people cry and moan about misinformation. They've been miseducated so hard they don't even know which way is up. They don't even know what gender is, really, or what sex is.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome once again to the Roundtable, everyone. The American Minds and the Claremont Institute's editors and publishers podcast. I am here with James Pullis, executive editor of The American Mind, Spencer Clavin, assistant editor of Claremont Review Books and The American Mind, and Matthew Peterson, founding editor. I know his title. I had the same experience a second ago. Founding editor of The American Mind and vice president of education here at the Claremont Institute. I am your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of The American Mind and the Claremont Review Books. So, well, that was fun last night.
Oh,
we're recording here on Wednesday because we want to get our fresh takes on the debate before producer Jake goes on a much needed and well-earned vacation Thursday and Friday. So we wanted to take up, we're really going to devote this whole podcast to the debate and the various themes of it and the radiating sub-themes or meta-themes around it. I rewatched the first half this morning. That's all I had time for. I had to ship the toddler off to daycare. But one of the big themes that was very interesting to me was Trump's attempt to, and I think somewhat successful attempt to drive a wedge into the Biden-Dem coalition. Biden said that he was going on about things, and Trump's response was, you're going to be run by your party. That's not what the radical left does. That's not what the party's going to make you do. Biden was trying to cut the moderate figure. And Biden's response was, the party is me. I am the Democratic Party right now. Trump with the interjection, not according to Harris, which was pretty delicious. And then a little while later, Biden at one point said, I beat Bernie. Trump said, not by much. And then Biden went on a little more to disavow the manifesto and the radical left's agenda. And then Trump responded, you just lost the left. So I want to draw an analogy here that will, for one reason, it will drive away any lingering Bulwark fans who are listening to this, or, God forbid, Bulwark editors or writers. So you have to fumigate podcasts every once in a while from Bulwark types. And so I want to draw an analogy to 1858 and the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Trump, the caveat, of course, it will be made. Trump's no Lincoln. In Trump's defense, I would say the only other possible Lincoln statesman would be Washington, in my opinion. But Trump's a far cry from Lincoln. We'll set that out there. It's fine. It's obvious. But Lincoln in 1858 in his Senate race against Douglas had to, one of the skillful things he did was make Douglas unpalatable to the Deep South by having him rest all of his arguments on popular sovereignty, which was if you want to have slavery in the territories that become states, you can have it. If you don't want it, you don't need to have it. That was the South couldn't abide this. They wanted a federal slave code. They had to protect its expansion, and it led to the breakup of the Democrats, and it helped Lincoln win the election. It was clever, and it was politically deft. And if you all want to learn more, go see this new documentary on Fox Nation called Might Makes Right about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Its executive producer is a Claremont fellow, Ben Judge. It features Claremont scholars. Lucas Morell, Alan Geltzo narrates. Charles Kessler talks about it, and Michael Burlingame, not affiliated with Claremont, but a contributor to the Claremont Review books and a skilled historian. My long-winded way of saying Trump, I think, did something deft there. It's been a theme. It's not new. He's been trying to drive this wedge, and there's some incipient evidence, at least on social media, that it had its effect in driving Biden away from this left-wing agenda. So that was one good thing done last night in what we must admit was a pretty unprecedented presidential debate.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the analogy that sprung to mind is the relationship between, as any good deep stater knows, relationship between an officer and an asset or an agent. I think what's going on the left right now is, psychologically akin to officers running assets and agents out in the field, suborning people. You bribe them or otherwise sort of pressure them into doing your dirty work for you, and you get to play the good cop. And you get to take shelter within your institution and clothe what you do in the raiments of respectability, while these, scummier and dirtier and emissaries that you send out into the field are paying the price and doling out the damage. I mean, this is what we have seen with the mob and the way that it's been activated in the streets. We'll get into all this later, I'm sure, but to claim that Antifa is an idea is preposterous on its face. But the truth lurking in the heart of that formulation is that the idea is to suborn people who are able to go out throughout the country and basically cause mayhem and menace the American people. And for the establishment Democrats who are enabling this process, they can just get on television and present themselves as being something other than those groups when in fact they are joined at the hip.
Yeah, there were, I think, two big rhetorical successes, strategically speaking, and I really think that's always Trump's greatest strength, is his insight into the rhetorical structure of what is now almost a thoroughly digital age, although it still has some sort of lingering TV aspects, such as debates like this. And the first thing that Trump did smartly is what Ryan alludes to, which is to raise the specter of all this radicalism that James describes, which, as you say, is the Dems are attempting to distance themselves from that while still benefiting from all of the intimidation and threats of violence that come with it and will come with it in a Biden administration. I mean, let us not mince words or beat around the bush when we say that Joe Biden just today tweeted a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse, the person currently facing charges for having brought a gun essentially to the Kenosha riots and attempted to defend himself and others. And that Biden tweet was meant to cast Rittenhouse as one of the supposed white supremacists that Trump supposedly refused to disavow during the debate. All that is untrue. More on that later. But the idea, Trump's idea, to basically, on the one hand, note that what Biden is representing himself as is not actually what most of the party or most of the people who will be in control believe or want, and to say actually that Biden can't disavow those people because he's weaponizing them and using them is a great way, I think, to drive leftists at least just away from Biden. We've talked about the kind of never Biden coalition that's growing, and that's really the only available win here in this debate, I believe, because there aren't a huge number of undecided voters. This is not the kind of thing that is likely to sway them one way or another. And if it is, then nothing that either of the candidates can really do differently will get them more or fewer undecided voters. However, there is a whole host of leftists and liberals out there who are looking at the absolute madness, the seething, sputtering racialism that is now coming, oozing with ever more venomous bile from the mouths of the vanguard of the radical left, and saying, what the hell is this? I cannot touch this. It will corrode me. And yet, as of right now, none of those people have broken in a serious or sustained or public way for the right, which is the only logical conclusion, which is go for Trump. The other thing that Trump did was to simply acknowledge that this whole setup is a farce and a sham, and that this 2-minute setup where each one of them gets to talk for 2 minutes is nonsense, that Chris Wallace is openly standing for Biden throughout it, and therefore to be as pugnacious in actual practice as the left has been in rhetoric for quite some time now. I mean, the things of which the Democrats accuse regular Americans on the daily, systemic racism, violence in language and action and speech and thought, all of those things, right, are terrible things to accuse people of. And so Trump is now sort of just jumping into the fray, which is why the whole thing was so incredibly pugnacious. The move on the left, which we saw at the end, was to pretend that Trump won't disavow white supremacy, a blatant lie. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but constructed basically out of nothing and out of ignoring that Biden wouldn't denounce Antifa or even admit that it exists, as James alludes to.
We should all remember really quickly, I know Matt wants to jump in here, but we should recall a few days ago, Biden compared Trump to Joseph Goebbels, which he pronounced Goebbels or Gobbles. It was like a turkey Nazi or something. So yeah, the level of rhetoric, has been pretty low.
I wanted to pick up on what Spencer was saying about the medium. It is the sense I have the morning after is, and everyone says this all the time. People have done this our entire lives, right after the debate. Oh my God, what's happened to America? How crazy is it that these two people are representing us and the intellectual quality is low and blah, blah, blah. But something really is different this time in this sense. People are they just assume it. They know that something is wrong with this structure of the debate itself. And what I would submit is Spencer's right. It's still acting as if we're in a televisual age in the 80s. And what do people want as the solution? Well, they say Trump should be on Joe Rogan. Why? Because Joe Rogan would, A, be a much fairer moderator, but also he would give them time to actually air out their differences and give them time to make their case, both in opposition and positively. That's why people want Joe Rogan to moderate a debate, because we know we would get a strong sense from both of them of what they're thinking right now about each other and about the direction the country should take. In a sense, you can't hide when you have all that time. And if you think about it, what makes that possible? I mean, that's first off, it's longer, right? It's much longer. It's not these short 2-minute bits that give you power if you're a narrator or a moderator. What the televisual module does is give power to those who package it, and they package it neatly, and there's a lot they can do to produce it. What Lincoln and Douglas did back in the day in live debates was more like Rogan in the sense that they just went back and forth, right, for a long period of time, over an hour sometimes speaking. And so Rogan it's a digital format. The podcast enables him to, without advertising, go in depth with people, have a long drawn out conversation. And therefore, we know that that's really what's needed. That would really give us a better, more accurate picture of who these people are and where they're at. But that's not going to be given to us this time. And so what you see then is almost the spiritual frustration of not being in a format where you can actually duke these things out at all, which leads people to do short quips, to make short quips back and forth. And it leads to all the kind of stupidity that we saw last night and the spectacle we saw last night that's really is kind of off-putting. But what isn't off-putting about it is it's honest. I think a friend of mine made this comment last night. I think it's true. This as far as exposing the differences where people are at in kind of a feelings realm, I think it was very honest last night. You did see real opposition and a complete and almost total alternative reality, right, or opposed reality that both candidates live in.
Yeah, I just want to append a note to what you're saying, Matt, about Rogan, which was a remarkable feature. How many people, actually on left and right, were sort of wishing that this were a Rogan-esque format. That's probably an adjective that will now live on in infamy. But the accusation against digital media when it first came out was that it was compressing our attention span into only soundbite level engagement, that we were only going to be able to just take these tweets or these little clips and we wouldn't be able to sustain any kind of longer form argument or attention to argument. It suddenly occurred to me last night, and I'm probably very slow on the uptake here in realizing this, but it suddenly occurred to me that like so many of the ruling class objections to the developments that have brought in our new age and unseated the ruling class, like so many of those objections, that was pure projection. This televisual format is the one that conduces to sound bites, that actually requires segments and these like neatly broken up, highly packaged, highly curated, and therefore led by the ruling class little sound bites, right? That's what Chris Wallace is there to do. He's there to pretend in the stance of neutrality to split these people up into a format that is exactly helpful to the doddering old man that's desperately trying to grab ruling class power back. What anybody who has done a podcast knows, what we know from developing this podcast, what I found out doing my own podcast was you start out in that idea that actually what you're doing is producing something clipped and curated. And then people say, no, actually digress more, go longer, speak at greater length, because that's what this whole thing is. It's just uncapping all of this pent-up energy that has been artificially repressed by people that don't want the world to change the way it's obviously changing.
Yeah.
I can just say briefly, it's about trying to show people some aspect of reality, right? I mean, that's what we ostensibly want to use communications technology for. So we want to be able to see what's going on. And probably the most obvious example right now is the live feeds of the riots. If the live feeds did not exist, would the riots exist? I'm not sure. We certainly would. The reason we were able to check the idiocy of the other side here, the denial of the other side here, is because we've all watched these live digital feeds, and without them, I don't even know where we'd be at.
Yeah, the quintessence of this phenomenon that you described, Spencer, is the fate of Quibi or whatever the hell it's called, which is short for quick bites, and is Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman dumping God knows how much money into trying to get people to watch television shows on the internet. And they have failed, and they're trying to sell off this company for peanuts. And what needs to be said is what everyone viscerally understood from that debate, which is that people like Chris Wallace, that professional class, is obsolete. There has been a change in communications medium that has rendered their professional class obsolete. They are living in a third reality, not the Trump reality, not the Biden reality, however much Wallace did do Biden solid after solid throughout the entire debate. Nevertheless, it's a third reality, which is one where the media, right, which is not the media, it's a specific kind of medium with a specific class of people who are experts in using it, amounts to a fifth branch of government. They see themselves as deserving of prestige and radiating legitimacy and authority because what they do for a living is indispensable to the functioning of a democracy. And the fact that you can sit in front of that debate and think to yourself, this person who's ostensibly running the debate is an obsolete figure. This person and those like him, there's some good reporters out there, and this isn't the end of reportage or whatever. I mean, people sharing information that they find out with other people is not ever going to go away. So, don't worry, people. There will be media forever, and they will have content, and some of that content will be useful. But that, blue check professional established media class is profoundly mistaken about their status in the current technological and psychological environment. And it's gotten to a point where, some of the tech guys who we're familiar with and who are now asserting themselves in a more public way are proving themselves to be better writers about technology and current events and politics than the gold-plated, blue-checked professionals on the East Coast whose job this is and who bank all of their prestige on the idea that they are entitled to tell you what's going on and how to process reality. Mike Solana, Antonio Garcia Martinez, these Substack bros, is how they're portrayed with just frustration and despair by the East Coast tech media class because they're being proven to be poor communicators relative to guys who are not media figures first and foremost. They're technologists first and foremost. And yet in their spare time, they're able to communicate with more compelling information, better takes, stronger analysis, firmer rooting in reality than what you get out of your average New York Times piece or whatever one of these magazines you want to muster. That era is ending. And the fact that it is ending is frightening to some people. And, this debate was a hot mess. And it's like, well, guess why? Because we're experiencing a sea change in the ruling media that forms our psychologies, and it's not going to be kind to the Wallaces of the world, and it's not going to be kind to the institutions that they think are a core component of our republic. They're not. It's over.
Yeah, forgive me, James, because you actually are a blue check, but since you've already effectively used that term as a slur, I feel better about doing it myself. The Twitter analog of Quibi almost is the blue check, which is an instrument of pure legitimation and credentializing and exists by some opaque metric that has now been completely removed from the public's eye. And this is not just sour grapes, but my own not having a blue check. But nobody knows, right, how blue checks get given out and why and when, except that if you look at who gets them, it's obvious. It's obvious how they get delivered. They are an attempt to designate certain people who, even in this new free media space, get to decide what is worth talking about and good and worth saying. One of the most, it has always been true, but it's really acute now, one of the most emotionally arresting features of the present moment is the difference between people who have grasped viscerally what you're saying, James, and people who have only grasped intellectually and are unable to decouple their emotional responses from the old hallmarks of prestige. The person to whom a Hillsdale degree means more than a Harvard degree on a resume. When you see it, that person is living more emotionally in the real world as it is now. But the pull of the old world is extremely powerful, especially if you grew up in it, especially if you have some stake in it, if your prestige, as you say, James, is vested in those old markers still working. I know this myself because, right, I have benefited from the use and the success of those old markers. However,
admission against interest, very good, Spencer.
Well, I mean, if James can rail against blue checks, I can rail against Ivy Leaguers and credentialized PhDs, because that's the point, right? I mean, this is the thing that people who have had to fight against the old guard have had to learn this. They've had to find some way of being at peace with their complete disregard by everybody that might foster their talent and usher them into a venue or into an institution that would help them and would sort of shape them. But in fact, instead, those people, the people with the most talent and insight, people like Solana and the others whom you mentioned, James, are having to just shoulder all of their might against the full force of these bajillion-dollar institutions that want them gone and crushed. And you can see them doing it, and you can see them kind of reckoning with it. And those who have reckoned with it quickly will succeed as the old world crumbles, and those who have not will be trampled under with the weak and the infirm.
Well, and let's be clear, like I have my blue check, Spencer's an Oxonian, Matt's a PhD. We all have hallmarks of the fact that we made good faith efforts in our lives to go the institutional way.
Yep.
And what we saw once we got inside the institutions was decadence, corruption, self-dealing, stagnation, oftentimes papering over a real smooth-brained idiocy with credentialism. And that is not an environment that is good for the soul, regardless of your political priors. And in order to not only survive in that environment, but to rise in that environment in the way that anyone, as their mortal life goes by, the pages of the calendar are flapping away. You want to engage in fruitful and productive and generative activity that raises your station. And the way to do that in these institutions, these obsolescing institutions, is by prostrating yourself and prostituting yourself and playing these debasing games of careerism and credentialism, not just for its own sake, but for the sake of perpetuating what is fundamentally a lie and a poison leaching away at the vitality of society, no matter, again, who you want to vote for. This is about much more than politics, although politics is a big part of it. It's, these journalists say, they clothe themselves in the First Amendment, and you can't criticize us because then you're criticizing a free press. They don't want a free press. They want a captured press, and they want to be the captives and the captors.
You wish to know what Clown World is? I will show you Clown World in a handful of dust. I recently tweeted, when was your radicalization moment? Kind of joking, but as always, when you ask a question, people are dying to share their experiences. And it was remarkable to me how many people totally unexpectedly, out of left field, said, my radicalization moment was in college when either I wrote a paper that I disagreed with and knew was wrong, but knew the professor would agree with and got an A, or I made a good faith effort to compose a cogent argument in defense of a view that I believed to be defensible and got a C because of my views. Mm-hmm. The sheer volume of people who have been unacknowledged in their radicalization by that experience. There are so many people out there who have had that experience, and they maybe didn't really cognizantly recognize that that was what was going on, that they were understanding that all of the actions they had to perform to succeed were a farce, but it made its emotional subcutaneous impact on them. And those people are about to stage a revolution, and much will depend on how those revolutionary energies are channeled.
I wanted to bring up this topic, which was on much display, throughout the debate at punctuated points, but really came up in a big way during the COVID discussion. And I want to preface it by saying, as those of you who read this kind of stuff or follow this kind of stuff, of course, know, one of the Never Trump and the sort of Democratic talking points about Joe is, his decency and stability and his honesty, and compared to the mendacious Trump. First of all, anyone who's followed Joe's career know that he lies like he breathes, like a lot of politicians, including about all manner of things. He plagiarized speeches. He lied about how he did in law school. He lied. Sort of bringing the topic of his kids up, and he used them in this debate too. But he's lied for years and still sort of maintains it that his wife and his child were killed by a drunk driver, which is actually not true, and that the poor truck driver has been hounded for it. Anyway, long way of setting up this. Biden displayed, I think, an interesting and typical for him combination of demagoguery and mendacity in his discussion of COVID and the experts and everything else. The first example of which, in my notes on this, it's just the bloody shirt in the margin. He says this of Trump, this is his economy he shut down. How many of you have dead family members because of COVID? And then later, Biden says he puts pressure and disagrees with scientists. A lot of people died, and a lot more are going to die unless he gets a lot smarter, a lot quicker. And then finally, masks make a big difference. His own CDC director said if we had masks between now and January, we save 100,000 lives. Trump's response, others also said the opposite. Biden's response, no serious person has said the opposite. Trump rebutted, Fauci has said both, among other things. And anyone who's followed this sort of COVID skeptic community knows that plenty of serious people have called into question the efficacy of masks. The CDC years ago did a huge study on masks, and it's really up in the air how effective they are at spreading respiratory diseases. But Biden, had this tick of, he doesn't trust the scientists. He doesn't trust the scientists. And Wallace continually backed Biden up on this. Wallace set up the question. He said, Redfield, the head of the CDC, and your own head of the Warp Speed, said that next summer was possible for the vaccine. How do you respond? And Trump's response is, this is a very political thing. Wallace, I'm sort of paraphrasing, how do you know it's faster? Wallace says, well, I've talked to the companies and they said faster. Trump, and he went through Moderna and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, et cetera. And then Wallace responded again, but your Warp Speed head said summer. I disagree with him, said Trump. And that's not exactly what he said. He said it could be summer. Wallace had to get the line in. He said summer. So it brings up what Trump said in almost the opening 10 minutes, which was, well, I guess I'm debating you too, Chris, but that's okay. I'm used to it. That's fine. But the bigger point is this is a theme that's come up on this podcast time and time again, and that is Trump really looks at politics politically in a way that our modern establishment is incapable of doing. That is to say, he looks at it through results and through politics, ruling administration, and ruling scientific expertise. I've brought up this quote before, but Jimmy Carter, back in his debate with Ronald Reagan, said, on any momentous decision, your experts are usually equally divided. And that's certainly the case with COVID, at least the ones around Trump, and the recent importation of Scott Atlas was a welcome development in this regard. But this theme will come up as we get to the end of this podcast and take up the question of Antifa. But Trump, for whatever his faults, rules politically and wants to govern experts in the interest of the common good as he understands it. And that was a leitmotif of this debate, and a big difference between Trump and Biden. And it's only there if you know what to look for. And finally, I'll just finish by saying Biden, of course, uses experts when he wants them, because he said it's his economy. He shut it down. But Biden, of course, has said that he'd shut the economy back down if he needed to. He didn't, institute a national mask mandate if he needed to. So, he's going to pick and choose his experts as he sees fit.
It's all a ridiculous waste of time. We need to be talking about how America can survive with its regime intact, a transformation in technology unlike anything that we've seen probably maybe since the invention of the alphabet. And instead, what we're talking about is the people who think that it's cool for rioters and protesters to fill the streets by the millions without masks are the same people who say, oh, the president, he disagrees with scientists, and his own scientists said that masks are good, when in fact that same crop of scientists went right along with all of the established leadership class when they said, you are in fact a racist if you don't go down to a Chinatown wet market in your major city right now and solicit it. They need your support. It's a complete waste of time. And it's designed to frustrate the ability of ordinary Americans to think their way out of a paper bag. And that passivity is choking out our economy. It's choking out local politics so that everything flows up to the administrative state. And yeah, it's creating psychological problems. Like, we've seen the polls where 1 out of 4 adult men have contemplated suicide this year. I mean, we know it's some roughly proportionate share of white women are on SSRIs. People are losing their friggin' minds, and the lockdown is not helping. And this bizarre, like self-dealing arbitrage where elites invoke experts 1 minute only to defy the most basic assumptions of their own experts 1 minute later. This is what's making people crazy, right? When Trump was described by Jeb Bush as the chaos candidate, right? What I thought at the time was, well, clearly he's the only guy on the stage who's responding to a certain section of the electorate, right? There is a constituency that is going systematically underserved or unserved in the GOP. And that's what created the chaos, was that you had a row of 10 guys on stage who could not connect with that constituency, with that electorate. And Trump was the guy. Oh, I'll do it. There's an opportunity that I'll take. He flirted with running for president for from the 90s on, and saw a seam and dove into it. And that the environment that he entered was an environment that had become chaotic because of the complete negligence and blindness of the institutionalized elite in the GOP. And now we're seeing the exact same thing happen again on the left. And of course I understand that there are, people who feel like they're going crazy on the left, who look at, Joe Biden and look at, Fauci or whoever and say, this is not going to work. And I would rather strap on the bike helmet and fire up the Molotov cocktails and take a chance with that than take a chance on Joe Biden. I understand. I mean, that seems to me to be a completely legible psychological reaction to this insane smoke and mirrors show that is going on at the top of the left elite. And there's a share of other intellectuals who want to tap out completely out of that debate, and yet still have some hope that if only, maybe Joe Biden's not perfect, but you get him in there and things will even out. I don't think there's any indication that it's going to even out. I think that the insanity and mental fragility and sense of world collapse that is setting in because these people purport to be able to rule at a time when everyone knows that all of their premises of rule are being obsolesced and swept away by conditions. I don't think it's going to work.
The real lesson of Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Well, just with what James is saying, I mean, look, what you're saying essentially is the chaos is caused by the recalcitrance of this class to acknowledge the reality we are now in.
Absolutely.
And the longer that they hold on, the longer that they, the longer they stay in denial, the more chaos they are in fact going to cause. And so that's the whole lie here, that Joe Biden brings you back to normalcy. Joe Biden is not going to bring you back to normalcy. Joe Biden has normalized political violence in our streets. And, you know, it's completely normal because he just refuses, like Antifa doesn't exist. Like we'll talk about that in a bit. I mean, what the left has done is normalize political violence. This isn't going to get any better with Biden. And let's be clear about why this is where this chaos is coming from. One of the problems is that right at the same time as we had this technology that is fundamentally changing, right, the very structure of politics in the West and culture, everything at the roots is being uprooted by digital technology. Right at that time, we also happen to have the largest percentage of old people we've ever had relative to the rest of the population. So in other words, all the people in power, right, the balance of the population in a democracy are all people who come from a time before the new technology came to be, fundamentally misunderstand it or try to treat it as if it was the same thing as what they dealt with earlier in their lives. And they're also just trying to cling to power. And so this is bad news for America because it means that they're going to double down, and they can double down, and they control everything. And it's not just the left. We should make clear this is a class thing. I mean, there are a lot of people in the upper middle class who are terrified right now, as we've said before, because they see what they're supposed to say and believe. And what they're supposed to say and believe is completely divorced from the actual reality that we all inhabit, from what we actually think, from what we actually want. So there's this artificial universe that, the Biden and everything he represents is going to try to cling to, even as the rest of reality melts down around them. And that is extremely dangerous for America. I think the problem is not that some of us don't know that, but how do you communicate that to people who are terrified and have every reason to continue to cling to this charade?
Yeah, the real lesson of the debate, which was really one that's been becoming clear for months, years now? I mean, James has been on this train forever. And I would say that at this point it should be blindingly obvious, but I've felt that way so many times that I can't imagine it will actually become apparent to a vast majority of people. But the real lesson here is that the divide is not between left and right or Republican and Democrat or whatever sort of facile binary you want to invent to describe the way politics in America has gone for however many decades or even indeed generations. It's a divide between two fundamentally opposing responses to the changes that we've been describing on this podcast. That the world is transforming, the digital age has blown the lid off of all of this popular unrest and all these people who were left behind by the consensus of the 80s and 90s and all of this new stuff that we didn't know about before. Plus, the ground is shifting under our feet in a way that is deep and fundamental because digital technology is different from televisual technology. All of that stuff is changing and happening. It's a sea change. There's two responses you can make to it. One, you can rebel. You can overthrow the old system in some way or another. You can reject the status quo because you see that it's already dying, it's not working for you. And people do this in all sorts of ways. Some of them admirable, some of them hideous, everything in between also, right? Some people react by hearkening to a hyper-religious age and desiring to, reinstate some form of moral supremacy in the country. Some people become vitalists and go away and lift and just better their own self and bodies as much as they possibly can and prepare for the coming apocalypse. Some people become racialists and take to the streets. All of those are forms of rebellion against the status quo, the old regime. Some of them, as people know, I hate. Some of them I kind of endorse and like. The other option is rank denialism, is simple clinging and clutching to the status quo. This includes, insistence upon the sort of elite civility that it was always a sham and is even more of a sham now, or insistence upon our blessed globalist future where there will be no borders or countries or religions, insistence upon libertarianism. When I listed this as one status quo option on Twitter, people said, "Oh, but libertarians want to abolish taxes. They're against the status quo." That's absurd. It's been the status quo forever now to kind of have a particular sort of genteel desire to unfetter the economy and the market and so forth for however long. What was apparent on the stage is that the status quo is this. This is not some unprecedented thing in that regard. It's just what the status quo hath wrought. It's what you get when you cling desperately to the old world as it passes away. And again, as I say, everything depends on how we marshal the energies of people who simply do not think that what worked 20 years ago is still going to work. Trump, as James indicated, has been basically the only person to marshal that energy in a way that does not entail burning American cities to the ground. And the left is basically trying to secretly marshal the burn cities to the ground energy while they sail into the White House on a veneer of civility and respectability.
I just want to plug quickly, on this whole COVID business, completely not brought up by either candidate or for various reasons on the left. There's no incentive to, and not brought up by Wallace, but is palpably obvious to those of us who've been studying this problem at an institutional level for years, is Bill Vogel's essay from the summer 2020 CRB about Trump's sort of grading Trump on COVID. I forget what grade he gave him, Spencer. It's probably B+ or something.
Yeah.
And it's called Knowing, Choosing, Doing. Go Google that on ClaremontReviewBooks.com and you'll find it. But Bill's point was, look, there's this whole infectious disease, public health, federal apparatus. There's a bunch of agencies. There's conflicting lines of authority. The Obama administration, and this was brought up, and including Biden, bungled the kind of post-swine flu re-upping N95 masks thing, which would have helped us maybe during the early coronavirus. Anyway, it's very hard for any president to really take hold of this whole thing and govern it in a way and direct it in a way that could have done much better than Trump did or any president did at the head of this kind of thing. So it's one of the products of now 100 years of the growing administrative state, the quote-unquote rule by experts, and the collapse of real political control and real responsibility. So in this type of system, it's impossible for any person at the head of a country of our size in a federal system like ours with this, cancer of unaccountable quote-unquote experts dropped on top of it, and now sort of with its tentacles all in the political lines of authority to really adjudicate this kind of thing. So go check out Bill's essay.
That's a great essay, and Bill also has a new one that I think is just his finest work.
Just
on
got
Biden.
up.
Yeah, just went up on CRB about Biden. It's really good.
The Week Leading the Woke is the name of that one. It's a pre-release for our fall Claremont Review Books issue, which we're putting to bed this week and will be in mailboxes in a couple weeks. Spencer's at the final sprint here. Well, good. Let's cover in basically. Some of you may have noticed we're just going all the way through. We've dropped our segments for various YouTube reasons until they cancel us, of course. We're going to just a big format and then opening and closing music. So this is our new normal, and we hope you enjoy it. But let's take up this question at the sort of final 20, 25 minutes or so of white supremacy, Antifa, and everything else, which was the closing third in many ways, along with election fraud and accepting results of this debate. The real standout, just to continue on my politics ruling, so-called experts or inferiors theme, at one point Biden said, as your own director of your FBI said, Antifa is an idea, not an organization. Trump, I think, channeling many Americans' common sense response to that was something like, "Oh, come on," and he sort of he was pushed on this, I think, by Wallace or maybe just by Biden, or both, as this debate went. And he said, "Wait, so you disagree with your FBI director?" He said, "Yeah, I disagree. I disagree," which is as it should be. The president, you should all remember, is the head law enforcement officer of the country and the head prosecutorial head of the country, and that would include ruling over the FBI. We've had this weird mystique grow up about the FBI and the Justice Department post-Watergate, which is starting to collapse, and Godspeed on that collapse. Oh, you're all in luck. David Barr, who I didn't introduce at the beginning, is now with us. We've switched up the timing of this recording, so David had to attend to some household stuff. So he's with us. Welcome, David Barr, managing editor of The American Mind. We're sort of in our final segment, even though we've dropped our segments officially. We have about 20 minutes to talk about the last third of this debate, and I prompted it. I'll prompt it again just to get you in on this. At one point, Biden said of Trump, your own director of the FBI said, Antifa is an idea, not an organization. And Trump, channeling the common sense American response, said, oh, come on. And then Wallace, I think it was Wallace, said, well, do you disagree with Ray? Well, he didn't say Ray, but with your director of FBI? And Trump said, yeah, I disagree. And we think that's a welcome development. And I think a lot of our friends on the establishment right and then on the left would be sort of aghast at that proposition. But politics should rule in America, and president was elected, not Mr. Ray.
I have to quote from the transcript on this one.
Thank you, James.
You are very welcome. Chris Wallace, you have repeatedly criticized, he says to Trump, the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. For those following along at home, that means that Antifa is a left-wing extremist group, according to Chris Wallace. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down, a normal phrase that normal people use in conversation, and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, etc.? Trump's response, sure, I'm willing to do that. Okay, that should be the end of the so-called debate over who should have said what and when. But of course, Joe Biden then proceeds to call President Trump racist in the debate. And so, racist, what does that mean? Well, it means what water-wheel-headed intellectual minstrel Ibram X stage name Kendi says it is. That is the operative definition of racism on the left today. And there are some dissenters, thank God, of course, some people with functioning brainstems still, and that's great. But that's the working definition. And so when you have an argument about white supremacists that is defined by Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, according to himself, saying that Antifa is in fact an idea and not an organization, when it has been an organization since the 1930s, 1940s, as we have covered on the website. When you have racism being hurled around, an epithet that is defined by someone who's not just sort of dancing on in the sideshow of the circus, but who is being pushed to the very top of the established media and established intellectualdom, cut a check for $10 million from the head of Twitter.com, not a publisher, by the way. No, this is a mere platform. Then you are going to enter into a bizarro world, which is exactly where the debate went when the specter of white supremacy was invoked. I mean, after all, white supremacy is an idea, not an organization, so therefore we don't even need to talk about it.
Yeah, right. Precisely.
But I wanted to say, I imagine if he had said that, imagine just the reverse world where you say white supremacy is an idea, not an organization, or you say, look, the Proud Boys are an idea, not an organization.
They're a Latino organization.
Boogaloo Boys. This is what are you talking about? This is no organization. This is just an informal group of people throughout the country with a kind of idea. What's the problem? And of course, the problem is that logic is not going to matter here. The gaslighting has begun. The actual organizations that have just destroyed billions of dollars in property and are threatening people, they don't exist. They don't exist. This guy wants to be president of the United States, and he's going to say Antifa is just an idea. But what we have to do is engage in this ritual of the 2-minute hate against the supposed white supremacist organization. So it's when I look back, I look back this morning at what Trump said coming out of Charlottesville. Of course, then he did denounce neo-Nazis, etc. He just made some distinctions. Crazy idea that he had, make distinctions. But when you look back at the language of the media is very similar. So it really is a kind of spiritual inquisition, right? You have to condemn the other, and the other are these white supremacist groups. That's the evil. But here's the thing, and no one's honest about this. None of us know a damn thing about any of these groups. They're tiny, right? They're small. They're not. We don't. What's Patriot Prayer? I mean, one of them was just murdered, right, in Portland. Do any of us really know anything about that organization? And when you do look up what they're about, and you don't see any evidence that they're white supremacists, we have a problem, right? And here's the thing that we need to realize. This is where this is going. Patriot Prayer, Proud Boys, these are not white supremacist organizations from what I can tell at all. That's actually not what they're about. They're not racist. That's not what they're about. So think about where this goes. What's going to prevent this from this category of small group that you don't really know anything about, that you have to condemn, you have to renounce, or otherwise you're a Nazi too, otherwise you're a bad person too? It's going to expand as Biden takes over. If Biden wins, you could easily see the Cultural Revolution, just the country just rolling right over to it. I woke up this morning thinking about that. It's very easy to see, if you can have someone running for president say Antifa doesn't exist, how Antifa and those organizations are going to continue to commit acts of political violence. Are they ultimately going to start persecuting, say, Christians directly? Of course they are. Churches are already being burned down, and you can't talk about it. You can't say anything about it. And is that circle of groups that gets called white supremacists going to grow? Of course it is. There's going to be a whole big basket of hate groups that everyone's going to have to denounce if they run for office, and that will be also persecuted in the streets. Their windows will be broken because they vote the wrong way. This is happening now, and you can see in that debate, in that entire segment, and then how the media took off on it the next day. You can see how this is all just going to slide towards cultural revolution, and it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, Barr wants to get in on this, but I'll just say something quickly. It looks so. I'm listening to this. I forget the author's name. Forgive me, but this biography of Hitler right now, Ascent, which is the early years, and it looks a lot like 1920s Germany, but it's our left that's driving it, not our right, so-called. Barr.
Yeah, just really quick. I had the opportunity to spend the last hour and a half or so with a Pinot of local moms. Remind me again, Ryan, a Pinot, thanks to Peachy, is a
group of Karens.
Or you remember, right? What is it?
It's a group of Karens, right?
Yeah,
a Pinot
is
Karens.
a group of Karens.
Yeah, actually, I shouldn't. My wife will kill me. But anyway, it's one of these pod groups, so our kids can, can socialize during COVID. These are, to a woman, a liberal, and so I have the chance to kind of informally poll them.
We'll insert this disclaimer, Bar. You did not mean to suggest, you liked the Pinot group reference, but you did not mean to suggest they're all Karens. They're good people.
Right,
yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
I should be cheeky. Yeah, and so I said, look, it's the topic of the debate. These are Washington women, so the debate came up, and again, these are liberals, and the thing they were most upset about. They said specifically, I don't care about this Antifa and the hate group stuff. I want to know about the schools and education. So I contrast that with the headlines of the media and the tweets this morning, and what they're zeroing in on. It couldn't be further from the worries and concerns of Americans, even Americans on the left.
Right. Well, this is the other thing is, does anybody making this claim, except the people that have already gone whole hog on Trump is the embodiment of all evil, Trump is literally Hitler, Trump is the next rise of Satan in the world, except for those people, does anybody who's saying that Trump refused to condemn white supremacy actually think that Trump endorses white supremacy? Trump has, never mind the fact that he actually did say, yes, I reject white supremacy during the debate. He said the word sure and then asked for a specific group to be told to condemn or what have you, or point at and, throw fruit at. But, you can go to Rob Smith online, Rob Smith's Twitter account, and find a thread of all the times Trump has denounced white supremacists. We forcefully condemn the evil of anti-Semitism, of hate. I condemn all types of racism and acts of violence. He's said the thing 1,000,000 times, and nobody believes the clap that's being put out there that, he's telling the Proud Boys to stand down and stand by because they're, that's an absolutely absurd narrative. The whole
Wallace said stand down.
Right. He
Those
just
are
said
words taken right out of his mouth.
basically what Trump said, and the whole debate was chaos. So this unfolded in a way that was probably not super favorable to people grasping what happened. But basically, Trump said, "What do you want me to say about these people?" And then Wallace said what he wanted Trump to say, and then Trump said it, and then did, but the thing that we need to be focusing on right now is Antifa, because they're the people burning the streets to the ground and burning streets to the ground, burning buildings to the ground on the street. And the point of that is exactly correct, which is what's the actual threat to American lives? What's the threat to American minorities? What's the threat to our belief in equality, to anything that might protect people who are not in the majority, racially or otherwise, in any demographic sense? The true threat is roving bands of weaponized Democrats and leftists, right? That's what's going. And so Trump, just rolled right on along to that, and the whole farce of claiming that amounts to a refusal to condemn white supremacy. Anybody who buys that is a chump.
They're freaking out because they pushed America's racial and ethnic minorities so far and so forcefully to the left that many of them are now throwing up their hands and hashtag walking away, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And so the left is now currently captive to a inbred elite of basically mentally ill white people, of educated in a certain way, miseducated in a certain. These people cry and moan about misinformation, and they've been miseducated so hard they don't even know which way is up. They don't even know what gender is really, or what sex is. Anyway, they control the party to such a degree that especially black men, Latino men, and even some Asian men, they peek their head outside and they go, "What?" And they go, "No, I'm not participating." And so this specter of, oh, well, it's white nationalism. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means white supremacy. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, it means whiteness.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not mis amigos, los Latinos. Did you see the Telemundo poll?
Yeah, that was great. 66%
Yeah.
of them.
Sorry,
right?
James, I didn't. I didn't.
Did you watch it in Spanish, David?
David is one of our Latinx brethren.
That's true. Sorry.
Well,
James.
I mean, like, you want to know what is going to happen if Biden wins. Look at the state of California. Mm-hmm. Generations of one-party rule. And then, privileged, we could say, people who had heretofore considered themselves to be knee-jerk, reflexive, down to their soul supporters of the regime of California, of the nation state of California, as Governor Gavin Newsom used to be so fond of saying. Wake up one day and they go, "Hey, California sucks now. This is scary. Maybe I should leave. I'm not comfortable here anymore. I need to get out." Well, if Biden wins, the United States of America will become more like California, not just in the regime and who rules it, but in the desire of a growing segment of the self-styled elite to somehow exit the regime and have it both ways. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to parts of the country where right-leaning folks who are actually capable of self-governance and maintaining a modicum of orderly civil life will carve out areas where things just work, where fires are put out, where local government is effective and not hag-ridden with corruption and sort of decrepit hippies grandstanding, for 4 hours on public access television, where people of different races and ethnicities actually mingle and do productive work together, where technologists who have good new ideas are able to start companies that actually generate wealth instead of just self-servingly propagating fantasy doctrines and using them as a substitute for actual productive work. Those are the areas of the country where blue state refugees are going to be running for a scrap of sanity and an ability to, God forbid, form families, raise families, maintain some degree of mental and physical well-being. That's what's going to happen, and it's going to be, in some ways, it's going to, I think, not be the dystopia that some fear of a Biden USA, because this elite has proven itself incapable of governing the country. It's proven itself incapable of even maintaining its own institutions to any degree of health and productivity. So they're going to lose control of areas of the country, and blue staters are going to be coming hat in hand, begging for a friendly reception in areas of the country that break away. Maybe not politically and formally, but detach themselves, rip out the feeding tubes from these elite sclerotic institutions that are no longer capable of even perpetuating themselves, much less running a country.
We should, just a few minutes left, we should close on this question quickly, but it's interesting and will be part of the news cycle, of course, and the coverage of this, which is the question of election fraud and the accepting of results. Trump, obviously and volubly, is quite concerned about the ascent of mail-in balloting. Wallace is continuing this lie that somehow normal absentee balloting is the same as mail-in balloting, where they're very different. The much higher bar, you have to sign an affidavit, you have to request, with the exception of a couple states, you have to request your ballot affirmatively to get your absentee ballot, whereas mail-in balloting is just mailing ballots writ large to what you think are your voting populace. And there's all sorts of anecdotes already, just from friends who, our friend, I'll just call him Josh, who lives in Texas but lived in Illinois fairly recently, said, he hasn't been in Illinois for 2 years, and he got an Illinois mail-in ballot in Texas. His employer's in Texas. He's been in Texas for 2 years. So, he pointed out, well, what's the chance that a lot of people who are getting these of a certain type are maybe trying to vote twice? I mean, it's just common sense. So the notion that election fraud cannot go up because it is a phantom, it just seems silly to normal Americans, given our hugely expanded experiment in mail-in voting. And so Trump hammered away at that. And then, his about accepting results, he said, if it's fair, I'll accept them, which seems to me to be a reasonable response. It makes everyone aghast, of course. And he basically agreed with Joe that if he lost fair and square, he'd go. But that won't be the coverage. Anyway, this will just be part of the news cycle, so I wanted to bring it up. If anyone has anything to add before we wrap, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say, where are the Republicans on this? I mean,
Right.
We constantly say this amongst ourselves, and we know that there's thousands of other folks like us across the country who are saying the same thing. Where the hell is our George Soros? I mean, where is our effort to counter this with real money, real intelligence, and talent in an organized fashion? And everyone can see this train wreck now coming. Everyone knows this. And again, this is why it just seems to me another takeaway from the damn debate was it all comes down to Trump. He has very few surrogates, very few people willing to stand up in the Republican Party, say the same thing that he is, warn about it, and act on it. And, I mean, after a while, you just have to say, I guess we want to lose. I guess we just want to lose.
They have a huge legal team going out. Our friend John Eastman and colleague is tracking all this. And last count, and this was last week, there were 250 or so lawsuits underway. I think I just saw that in Pennsylvania, basically they're dropping the affidavit signed requirement for mail-in ballots. So, I mean, it's palpable to everyone that there's an effort by the Democrats look, some of them may hold this view sincerely under the notion that they've been told for years that statistically there's never any election fraud, and they want as many people to vote as possible, so they make the claim of not disenfranchising anyone. I'm sure plenty of them hold that sincerely. But there's a good cohort, especially of the professional class, political class, and media class, and elite class in the Democratic Party who knows that this vote, especially if it's murky and open to the normal machine politics of old, of party politics of old, that it's going to go in their favor, especially in states they really need to win, like Pennsylvania with large urban populations, and maybe even Florida, et cetera, et cetera. So election fraud is a thing to any commonsensical understanding of how elections work and how much is at stake. So it just seems to me that the left and the received wisdom from the media, it's just a huge exercise in gaslighting, and Trump's just trying to politicize it. And to our ruling class, that means he's on the cusp of being a coup activator. But to us, it just seems like common sense and an effort to speak some common sense to the American people.
Give a shout out to James O'Keefe.
Yeah, everyone should go. I mean, probably all of our listeners have seen evidence of it, but O'Keefe did some great undercover work exposing the Somali machine led by Ilhan Omar and her adjacent people, basically ballot harvesting. And it's interesting. Go to Project Veritas, and that's their leading video. James had some phenomenal number of views already on that whole thing, so everyone should go check
Ryan,
that out. Yeah.
Also,
David.
if I could add, and Matt, you just said something that gave me a new thought. What's happening now? An American Mind is part of this. I think for listeners, devoted listeners already know, but tell a friend. What you're having are super. I don't know what kind of title to give these people, but folks like James O'Keefe, like Christopher Rufo, these armies of one. You have. They tend to be young conservatives that don't necessarily flow through the mainstream conservative waters, like go to certain school, internship at AEI, et cetera, et cetera. They're doing their own thing and they're producing marvelous work.
Yeah.
I see the American Mind as kind of part of this movement. And I see a lot of the rest of the intellectual conservative world as a number of paces behind. And so look those people out. Folks like Andy Ngo, seek those people out. And it's an exciting time, but there are too few of us. So
I would be
and the only way that we change this, to my mind, all the stuff we're talking about today, increasingly, the more I think about it, is if you take those people and create new media companies, new media organizations that start to unify these people in these efforts, and there's an enormous opportunity to get out in front of everyone else because they're not doing it. And frankly, nothing's going to change unless people are able to see what's actually happening.
Yeah, I would be derelict to my duty as president of the Claremont Institute if I didn't mention that both James O'Keefe and Chris Rufo, and for those of you who haven't listened to our past podcast, Chris Rufo pretty much single-handedly in the last month took down critical race theory, racial sensitivity training, as Chris Wallace benignly put it. That's not what it is, in the federal government and with federal contractors. This is another example of Trump getting things done. As soon as he found out about it, he thought it was anti-American. He called it that in the debate, and he'd gotten rid of it last week, and is causing all sorts of wonderful headaches for government contractors in the private sector as well, who can no longer teach their white employees that they should hate themselves and apologize for their privilege. But yeah, Chris Rufo and James O'Keefe both did Lincoln Fellowships with the Claremont Institute in recent years. And we didn't teach them all this great stuff that they're doing, all these this strategy and tactics they're employing, but we equipped them, we hoped, with the tools to understand the American regime at a deep level and our conflicts today at the fundamental level. So it was a pleasure. We're proud to call them alums. Well, with that, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at AmericanMind.org, Claremont.org, and ClaremontReviewBooks.com. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a 5-star review. You know you love this content. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. Jake, have fun on your vacation. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.
Will you fight with me, brother, one last time, one last ride? Don't turn away, don't tell me that we're not the same. We face the fire together, brothers to the end. Don't run away, our time will come, but not today. I stand beside you, brother, with you to the end. Don't turn away, don't tell me that we're not the same.
Don't shoot the messenger.
Or are we?
I think every
Spent a lot of
preview
time
is
around
you.
Peterson last night, so I got riled up.
Little did we know, James took the bendy straw shotgun approach to the Leninade before he came on.
By that logic, there's no reason for Biden to serve.
Yeah,
We've seen enough. We don't need to tire him out.
cool. See you, Dave.
Roger that.
Yep.
Okay, I'll see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.